What's going on, everyone? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres, with ScoopDuck on 3, coming to you on Tuesday, February the 4th, 2025. Glad to have you guys along. Thanks so much for being here for another episode of the pod. I am joined by Justin Hopkins, ScoopDuck owner and publisher. J Hop, are you staying warm out there in Medford?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on it. You can see I got a hoodie on and I got my hat on, and then when I leave here in a little bit to go brave the snow and ice. Luckily, I have a truck. I'll throw my backer jacket on and try and stay warm. And we are expecting a high of 36 today, so a heat wave.
Dang, yeah, that is definitely a lot colder than it is here in Long Beach, but I'm crossing my fingers for some rain. That was a big weather topic of conversation over on the Scoop Duck message board. So always love talking with our subs, and who knows where the conversation can take us. It can go all sorts of directions, as I'm sure you know very well. But we have some new predictions that we want to get into in today's episode of the pod. But before we get to that, from our prediction Tuesday that you made over at Scoop Duck, we got a little bit of coaching news to get into, Justin, because Rashad Samples is going to be staying at Oregon after interviewing for the Dallas Cowboys running back coach job. So what did you kind of make of that development?
Yeah, I think it just, another thing that speaks to Dan Lanning and the culture he's built at Oregon. I know money talks, but obviously being organized there and being aggressive on that front. I think you look at Coach Samples, and I don't know, he's going to end up being paid, or 700 grand or whatever the number is going to be. That's really good money. That makes it really hard for other schools to come and poach these coaches for lateral moves. Now, I understand the NFL is a little bit of a different ballgame than college football, but it's moving towards not being all that far off anymore as these coaching salaries for college guys, catch up to the NFL guys. So, we both know Coach Samples was huge with the DeCorian Moore signing for Oregon. We both know that he's just a tremendous asset for Oregon as they continue to try to get into Texas more and more. So, I think all those things are great. I think he's a great coach. I think he's a really bright young mind. And, again, great news for Oregon. Keeping him and then keeping that continuity, right? I know we're going to get into it, but there's a lot of other schools out there that are replacing coordinators and this and that. And so far, at the moment, it looks like Oregon is going to go in with the exact same coaching staff that they had this past season. And that can be, with all these new faces that we'll see in the spring, that continuity there can help, with Oregon, handling all of the player changes they're going to have.
And continuity is such an important part of the game now, Justin, not just from a player personnel standpoint, but like you said, the coaching standpoint, and being able to keep a coaching staff together is getting harder and harder. And the best ones are able to do it every year, or they can navigate it if the coaching carousel strikes, as we saw with Nick Saban year after year after year at Alabama, bringing in some heavy hitters, and just being able to move forward and kind of go without a hiccup of any sort. So the interesting thing for me with the sample situation, and I don't know why, maybe it's because I got new headphones, but my mic seems a little bit off, so I'll maybe fidget with it, but hopefully it's not too bad for you guys there. Um, the interesting thing for me with the sample situation is how closely tied to the University of Texas this whole thing was, right? Because we know the Cowboys also looked at the Shard Choice, the Longhorns running back coach, and I think some people were thinking, well, if Choice takes the job, then who's to say the Longhorns aren't going to get Samples on the phone and say, hey, here's another opportunity for you to come back to your home state and make some noise and just continue this tremendous momentum that they're obviously enjoying after their first year in the SEC and making their run in the college football playoff. So for him to stay on the staff obviously helps you from a coaching standpoint. We know he's a rising name, even though he's already been at the NFL level, working with the Rams, of course. But his value on the recruiting trail in the talent-rich state of Texas cannot be overstated. And we know that Oregon's going after some big names in 2026 as well, with Tre'Davious Ball, the 2026 running back, already in the fold.
Yeah, it's just I agree with you. I think for me, as far as that process unfolded, and it was relatively short and sweet as far as, the news coming out, and then Samples obviously, saying that he's remaining with Oregon. Well, he hasn't said it, but, basically that he is staying with Oregon. I think the biggest concern I had was if the Cowboys did hire Tashard Choice and Texas made a run at Coach Samples, because that, frankly concerned me a lot more than him going to the Cowboys. But in the end, it worked out perfectly. I think, in my opinion, I believe that both Samples and Tashard Choice turned down the Cowboys' offer to go there and instead to remain at the schools that they were at. I think there's a lot of concerns with the Cowboys and the hire they made, after Mike McCarthy and all of that. So, if you're Coach Samples, you feel like you're in a really good spot at Oregon and you're secure and just waiting for the right opportunity. And let's face it, Coach Samples is going to leave. Like, it might not have been this time, but Coach Samples is going to leave. This is a 30-year-old guy that's, getting his name, linked to head coaching jobs, albeit smaller schools at the moment. That'll change. Like, that's a guy that's going to end up with an opportunity that's going to be too good to pass up, and that's the way it goes. But I'm not surprised that he didn't move laterally at the very least.
So the Ducks are able to hang on to a key member of their coaching staff with Rashad Samples electing to stay at least one more year at Oregon. So that's definitely some good news, and news of any kind, I feel like, for you and me is good at this point, Justin, right? As we are in the dreaded month of February, you can maybe say. I think it's a good thing because it's a little bit easier for us. Like, that's when people take vacations in February or July. But neither of us are on vacation right now. We're still grinding over at ScoopDuck. So it was fun to kind of have this story to talk about and monitor. But nonetheless, a big offseason win for Dan Lanning, keeping one of the key pieces of the staff around in Eugene. I know that you made a couple of new recruiting predictions this morning in our Prediction Tuesday over at scoopduck.com. So I'll just toss that one up to you and let you go for it there.
Yeah, just real quick, made a couple predictions, both offensive linemen, both the 26 class and both in favor of the good guys. 4-star interior offensive lineman, Tommy Tofi from Sacramento. Archbishop Riordan, I think, is which
from San Francisco Riordan. Maybe he's from Sacramento originally. Just wanted to clear that up because I feel like some people get confused sometimes.
For sure. No, he's a top 150 player, looking at Oregon, looking at USC and others. Oregon, obviously, that's a name that you and I know have been at least talking about for 6 months, if not longer already. So, Oregon clearly, putting in the work there. You can see his profile, which you have up if you're watching this on YouTube. 6'7", 300 and something pounds. I mean, he's a big boy. So, it's nice because I do feel this way. I think that Oregon is obviously going to take a bigger offensive line class in this cycle. I think you're looking anywhere between 5 to 7 guys, but when it's all said and done, probably be pretty tough to get to 7, but 5, 6 guys. And it seems to me Oregon is really prioritizing offensive tackle. What I mean by that is they're going for elite offensive tackles. Obviously, Cody Green's already committed. I believe he's a top 30 player in the On3 industry ranking, so a very elite guy there from modern day. And then, of course, we've been talking about, Jackson Cantwell, the number 1 player in the 2026 class, which is an offensive tackle. Emmanuel Ihenicho is, like the number 3 or 4 ranked player?
He's right behind him, yeah.
Right behind him, yeah. Both, basically top 5 players, regardless of position. Both are offensive tackles. So I don't think you need to get all 3 of those guys. In holding Green and then adding Cantwell and Ihenicho. I also don't think that that's entirely possible. But if you can at least get one of those 2 of Cantwell and Ihenicho, put them with Green, keep those guys locked in, you can work on, Tommy Tofi and really build in the interior of that offensive line as well. What I like about Tommy Tofi, just looking at his size, this is a guy that could play interior and you could possibly kick, out to the edge if you need to. On the offensive line. So just with his build and his length and his size, he might be a guy that you can move around in a pinch. Again, that's just a really big projection. You never know. But I did put in a pick. And I will say, with both of these picks, with both these predictions, I don't think that we'll see any commitments in the month of February. It's going to be a pretty dry month, probably a fairly dry March as well. But you and I have been putting in some of these picks based on what we've heard out of Junior Day and just kind of where things stand with some of these guys.
Tofi was one of those big Junior Day visitors for Oregon in the 2026 class. We know Oregon likes to recruit the Bay Area relatively heavily. I think that we can all admit or acknowledge that there's a pretty big gap between Southern California and Northern California just in terms of the quantity of talent that comes out. But Oregon's going to do their due diligence and make sure that they get those blue chippers, those high-end prospects from Northern California every year. I don't know. I guess they took Matt Johnson in the 2025 recruiting class, but you also have Jericho Johnson from the 2024 recruiting class out of Northern California. So they're doing their thing out there. And of course, we know Oregon has some ties to Reardon with a guy like Junior Adams, who's from the Bay Area. And then Chris Lawson, if you'll remember, he was recruited by the Ducks, also out of Reardon in the 2025 recruiting class. So there's some familiarity there. I definitely think I'm not too far off making a pick myself here, Justin. I know that Tofi told me in an interview that Dan Lanning was the first head coach to come see him at Reardon during the January contact period. So I'm right there with you. I really like Oregon's position right now in this recruitment. And I think we could see a little bit of I don't know if I'd say mirroring, but when you were talking, I was thinking about the size of Oregon's offensive line class. In 2023, for example, we saw the Ducks load up on defensive linemen. 2024 got some as well. 2025, pretty light. So I think that we're going to kind of see some balancing, if you will, in this cycle. And Tofi is definitely one of the best that they have on their board right now. So Ducks got some momentum there. You threw your pick in, and now I'm going to get up the next profile that we're going to talk about because you made another prediction for a little bit of a lesser known name on the offensive line, I would say, but he keeps coming back to Oregon, and Oregon keeps going to see him. So what can you tell us about your other prediction?
Yeah, staying on the offensive line. Obviously, this Jax Tanner here out of Idaho, he is unranked. So this is one of those guys, at least unranked by On3. It looks like he's got a ranking, a high 3-star, borderline 4-star with 24/7. But again, like you said, this is a guy that the signals are there that Oregon has prioritized. Jax Tanner has brought him on campus multiple times. They were out there and visited him a couple times during that January visit period where coaches could be on the road. So, this to me kind of reminds me of like not totally, but like a Zach Staskowski from the last class, a guy that Oregon, says, hey, look, this guy's plenty good to come play for us. And, maybe prioritizes him a little bit more than some of the others. And I'm sure that's based on region. I'm sure that's based on what they've seen in film. I'm sure that's based on interest coming from Tanner and his family. And then this one's slightly different, right? Because we know that Tanner is a guy that could potentially be taking a missions trip out of high school. So it could be a 1-year trip, 2-year trip, 1.5. We don't know. He might not take one. I know that that's undecided, but it's certainly on the table. So, because of that, a school like BYU is very much in the mix. I know Utah is very much in the mix and some of these other programs. So I think this is a guy that will rise up the rankings, Jax Tanner. And I was prepared to make the pick. I think Oregon leads right now. And quite frankly, to be honest, I think the only way Jax Tanner doesn't end up in this Oregon class is if the Ducks just end up kind of filling up at that interior offensive line position with guys that make their decisions ahead of Tanner. So, and those are the things that happen. That's why Oregon always has a really good recruiting board of prospects. Each position group is, hey, in case, we fill up or in case we miss on a couple guys, we still have these other guys that we've kept warm. So a great strategy. And I think Tanner will end up more than likely committing to the Ducks, again, barring maybe some other guys jumping in ahead of him.
Tanner is an interesting recruitment because he is a little bit more of a lesser known guy, but despite the rankings, I think the rankings are going to catch up to him at some point because this guy just keeps putting great film out on the field, and he's the reigning Gatorade Player of the Year for the state of Idaho, the Gem State. So it's not like he's some slouch. Oregon's going after this guy for a reason, and they've shown an increasing interest in the state of Idaho, looking at a guy like Kenyon Sadiq, who came from Idaho, and then Gatlin Bear, who we know is on his mission trip right now. But Duck fans, I feel like I'm seeing more and more posts. When's this guy coming back? When's this guy coming back? So that's a potential game-changing receiver that you can't forget about, even though he's not with the Ducks. You got to bookmark him for coming back. But I like this pick as well. I think that the interesting note to add here is that Joe Lorig is a name that has been mentioned prominently for Tanner in this recruitment in my interviews with him. So I think Tanner, right along with Grant Wise, is another name you got to watch for in the 2026 recruiting class along the interior of the O line. And those two guys have been pretty clear priorities for Alik Terry so far.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned Grant Wise as well, because again, that's a guy that's maybe not as well known, right? He's not a Jackson Cantwell. He's not a, even a Tommy Tofi or Cody Green. His name's not out there that everybody knows. But I mean, Grant Wise is a guy, like you said, that Oregon has prioritized, has been on campus a couple times already. I believe the coaches went out there. I believe they went out there twice. I know they went out there at least once to see Grant Wise. So, again, those are two guys. And we've seen Dan Lanning not be afraid of taking guys that he's confident in that might be unranked or 3 stars or whatever. I think you and I are both high on Cooper Perry, the wide receiver out of Arizona that Oregon signed. And most people are kind of like, why Oregon? Well, they saw something early. This wasn't like a backup plan. And they like, oh, we got to get Cooper Perry. They took his commitment early and never wavered. So they clearly saw something in his game that they think they need or they want or fits with what they're doing. And I think, the reason I say that is that seems to be the case with Jax Tanner. And you know what? I mean, Dimitri Manning last year was one that maybe you and I were not sold Oregon would move after, and they opted to in the end, and of course signed him. So, yeah, Dan Lanning's not afraid to do some of that stuff, and I'm okay with it. They trust their evaluations, and I trust their evaluations more than mine too.
Yeah, and the proof is in the pudding, I think. And the offensive line position is one of the more interesting ones to watch because they have gotten a little bit portal dependent in the past couple of years, but you understand why. You're not going to see a lot of young offensive linemen out there early, or if you do, you want it to be because they created separation or maybe they got eased in, like in the Josh Connerly role. It's very rare that you'll find that Penei Sewell type of guy very often, but fun to watch. And offensive line's definitely at the top of my, I think, recruiting positions to watch in the 26 class. One more topic for us here, Justin, on the pod today. A lot of coaching movement in recent days or the last week or so. You got Chip Kelly leaving Columbus, fresh off of a national championship with the Buckeyes, to head to Las Vegas to team up with Pete Carroll and the Las Vegas Raiders. As a lot of movement for the Buckeyes specifically. We all know that Jim Knowles packed up shop and headed to College Station or State College. I can't remember which one it is, but
State College.
State College. Thank you, to team up with Penn State, who's looking dangerous heading into 25. So what do you think about all the coaching movement that we've been able to see lately?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, it would give you and I more to do if we were covering some of that with Oregon, but not upset that, Dan Lanning's been able to hold on to his guys. But yeah, I mean, obviously you look at Ohio State, what an interesting case study there. You lose both coordinators. I know they lost other position coaches as well, and some, and some off-field role guys as well, analysts and whatnot. So, and that's what happens when you win. People want your guys, and I get it, but I mean, I think with Jim Knowles, he couldn't wait to get out of there fast enough, and to go to a rival, like one of your top, 2 rivals. Wow, that was pretty brutal. The Chip Kelly move always made sense to me. I always felt like if that guy was getting a shot at the NFL, he was going to take off again. And obviously, really interesting for him to unite with Pete Carroll. It feels like, the Pac-12 has died and been reincarnated in Las Vegas for the Raiders. But and then, along with that, they went and stole good old Jed Fish's offensive coordinator and brought him to the Raiders. And Jed Fish lost his defensive coordinator. I think he might have upgraded at defensive coordinator, but I mean, with Ryan Walters. But yeah, I mean, a lot of coaching movement up there. It's been an interesting coaching movement cycle. And again, you and I talked about this to start off the show, continuity. Dan Lanning's got continuity heading into this season. Ryan Day's going to have his work cut out for him, not only because of all the talent that he lost a ton of NFL talent, losing both coordinators and other coaches. And then you look at Jed Fish, he didn't have a great season, and then he's got to replace both coordinators. So Washington will be a real interesting case study as well this year.
And I didn't even know this until I was doing some of the browsing yesterday, but I guess it's like the year of the dad and the coaching offseason move, because you got the Belichick's over at North Carolina. We know the obvious overlap with Washington there. And then I didn't even know that Brennan Carroll was Pete Carroll's son, who now is packing up shop, leaving Seattle for Vegas as well. So I think we could see a little bit of some recruiting effect with the offensive line. I saw some rumblings of that move maybe having some more impact on Washington's recruiting class. And Isun Tafa is the guy that I think we want to keep an eye out for out of the state of Utah, who's committed to Washington. But just a real interesting time to be following all this coaching carousel stuff because it's February, but more moves keep coming out.
Yeah, I think this is a byproduct of just, the transfer portal and NIL and all these timelines that continue to be inserted into college football are going to move existing timelines. And so as we're seeing now, we're talking about coaching moves in late January and February, which typically wasn't all that common. That's, I think, going to be a byproduct now because a lot of these schools are putting in contracts that their buyouts drop after January 15th or February 1st or whatever the case might be. And that's because they want to keep those coaches there, get their players signed in those recruiting classes and transfer portal classes. And then if the coaches leave after, then it's not so much of a downfall. So, again, these are some byproducts as the calendars continue to move around in college football. And there's just so many things. And now you've got playoffs that are going, 3 to 4 extra weeks longer than the regular season. So it's just going to be, we're going to have to continue to see how things evolve in college football. Last note for me, kind of watch out for USC. They are building a front office of recruiting guys down there finally, general managers. And I mean, it's starting to resemble exactly what Oregon's built with Marshall Malco and the guys there. So I would say, I know we've been able to kind of kick the dog while it's down a little bit, but I think USC is going to be a little bit more formidable on the recruiting trail this year moving forward, as long as they can get their NIL together. I just don't think they have a strong NIL structure, but that's why you're hiring these guys that Lincoln Riley is bringing in.
I'm right there with you. I've been very intrigued by a lot of the moves that Lincoln Riley and the Trojans have made this offseason in the recruiting world and the NIL department, front office department, and they're coming off a big junior day with 2 Oregon commits, Jonas Williams, Tamuhini Tapui, making those trips. So we've been talking a lot about that over on ScoopDuck. So we want you to join us, guys. Come see us at scoopduck.com. You can try us out for just $1. Best in Oregon football recruiting and an incredibly engaged message board. So it's been another fun episode. If you want to find more of Justin, you can tap in with him at jhopkinssd. You can find me anywhere at mtorresports. And subscribe to the ScoopDuck on their YouTube channel. Help us grow the channel and share the show. But until next time, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Ducks Dish Podcast.